Hello out there. I am testing this camera on my laptop for the first time ever, and this time making a video on my laptop for the first time. And I've decided to do another series out there called movie reviews. I'm going to be reviewing a movie for the first time. This is the first time I've ever actually reviewed anything that isn't a video game or anything like that. So, I did do a few movie reviews in the past, but they were on theatrical films that had just come out in those days and they're no longer up. But this time I'm going to be truly doing an official review on a movie, and a movie franchise that I really adore a lot, Austin Powers. Yep, I'm going to be reviewing Austin Powers here, the franchise. And anyway, I'm going to be talking about the first two films. I'll do another separate review for Gold Member, but on this movie review, it's going to be a double feature one. I'm going to be reviewing and talking about and everything, and how I feel about the first two Austin Powers movies, and that's, of course, Austin Powers 1, International Man of Mystery from 1997, and Austin Powers 2, The Spy Who Shagged Me from 1999. Those first two movies were released 2 years apart from each other, so that kind of goes to show you that the first movie was a big hit and all that, and a lot of people really like the second one, too. It was the first Austin Powers movie I personally saw in the theater, but I'm going to be reviewing, of course, the first one, International Man of Mystery, first. Now, Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery, I'm going to, right now, discuss what happened in the movie, alright? It starts out with Dr. Evil in 1967 in his lair in Las Vegas, Nevada, or outside of Las Vegas, and like in the middle of the desert. And you see Dr. Evil, although you don't really see his face yet, but you can see the back of his bald head and his cat, Mr. Bigglesworth, who still has all his fur and all that. And he welcomes everybody to his underground lair and says that he's gathered all the deadliest assassins, all the assassins that went after Austin Powers and obviously failed to kill him. And of course, Dr. Evil, when somebody fails him, he puts them into the furnace thing. He hits a button and then they get down in the furnace, they burn alive, yada yada yada. And of course, he spares Mustafa and Frau Farbissina because, he trusts that they won't fail or let him down because, they're like pretty high ranked in his list of people on his evil empire. And then he says we must kill Austin Powers, and then it cuts to our main hero of the story here, which would happen to be Austin Powers himself. And Austin's right there in the middle of London, England, walking the streets, obviously a shining man. He gets attention whether or not he's looking for it because he's a sex symbol of the 60s. And like I said, we're still in 1967 here, 30 years before the movie actually came out. And what happens from here, women obviously approach him, and then he gets out his camera and does a few snapshots of these girls modeling for him because obviously Austin Powers is a photographer. And he loves to take pictures of women, to make like model posters and all that maybe even teenage boys of 1967 can hang up on their bedroom window or door or whatever. And and then all of a sudden more and more people start chasing Austin in the opening credits sequence. And then all of a sudden, a car comes by, honks its horn. It's none other than Mrs. Kensington, played by Mimi Rogers. And all of a sudden, Austin, like, looks at Mrs. Kensington, and, yeah, he, like, says, "Hello, Mrs. Kensington," and then she replies, "Hello, Austin," and then he even asks, "Why don't you ever model for me, Mrs. Kensington?" And then she says, on account of the fact that her husband wouldn't allow it and all that, and then Austin throws in his first "Oh, behave" quote in reaction. And then Basil, of course, contacts Austin and Mrs. Kensington in the car and tells them that Dr. Evil has a trap planned for them right there. And then they go into that, like, club or whatever. And when they go into the club, all of a sudden, Mrs. Kensington says to Austin, "Austin, it's a swinging shindig." And then Austin replies, "It's my happening, baby, and it freaks me out. Yeah, man." Goes like that, and when after Austin does that, he obviously is dancing along, and then all of a sudden a man dressed as a woman, who's like posing as a woman serving drinks. She like asks Austin if he would like a drink, and then he replies, and then Mrs. Kensington reminds Austin that they're supposed to be looking for Dr. Evil, and then he punches what appears to be a woman out, and then he reveals that this ain't no woman, it's a madman. Yeah, and then reveals it to be Dr. Evil's assassin, and then he pulls out a knife, and the one guy like says in British, "Look out, he's got a knife," and yeah, and then all of a sudden, Mrs. Kensington knocks him out, with some roundhouse kicks and all that, and then Austin thanks and says, "Good work, Mrs. Kensington, all right," and then grabs up the henchman and, like, interrogates him. "Where's Dr. Evil? Where is he?" And then Dr. Evil, like, tries to shoot Austin as he's interrogating his thug, but apparently Austin misses and hits the henchman again, and then all of a sudden Austin catches it, and he looks up and says, "There's the bastard," and then and then all of a sudden Austin, like, gets his gun, and Mrs. Kensington falls along, and then he says, "All right, let's go," and then coming through, and all that, and all the people who attended the club and all that are, like, watching Austin and Mrs. Kensington flee to go after Dr. Evil, and then they get to the top of the club, and they, like, go through, like, the strings and all that, and then all of a sudden, as Austin and Mrs. Kensington seem to have Dr. Evil cornered here, Austin throws, "I've got you now, Dr. Evil," and then Dr. Evil replies, "Not this time," and then, "Come, Mr. Bigglesworth," and then, "Meow. See you in the future, Mr. Powers," and then he cryogenically freezes himself and goes into the recesses of space, and he's hiding up there for 30 years, and and then he returns to Earth in 1997 after a 30-year absence from the surface of the Earth. He comes back to Earth and all that, and then apparently, like, the military and, like, all the services, it's like they're keeping an eye on certain situations, and then all of a sudden, he contacts this one, like, soldier played by Charles Napier, who was in a lot of movies back in the 90s. He was even he made a guest appearance on an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine on season 4, The Little Green Men. That's actually one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes, but I won't go into detail. That's beside the point here. I will, however, move on with, and he wasn't the cable guy again, beside the point. Now, back to the topic at hand. Charles Napier also figures out that after he reveals it's in the shape of the big boy, and then all of a sudden he's back. Well, in other words, the big boy never left, sir, and he, like, even tells him, "I want you to forget what you saw here today," and then apparently he actually does know what it is, and then he tells Phillips, "Prepare the jet, get my overnight bag, and feed my fish, not too much. I'm off to London, England," and then he meets up with Basil Expedition, which is obviously the R to Austin Powers James Bond. I forgot to even mention that this is obviously a James Bond parody, and like a more like promiscuous version of James Bond, because James Bond is a lot more of an introvert, while you got Austin Powers, who's also a secret agent, who's like far more extroverted, more like it, and passionate and hype and all that. He isn't really laid back or all that, like, and similar to how James Bond is, because James Bond is a lot more calm and careful compared to Austin, kind of. Because Austin's middle name is Danger, after all, but I won't really get into that yet. Anyway, yeah. So the American people, he meets up with Basil Expedition and a Russian man who's played by the same guy who played Mr. Dickovich in the Raimi Spider-Man movies 2 and 3. Another beside the point detail, but anyway, they go into the cryogenic freezing chamber and they see a frozen Gary Coleman and Vanilla Ice before them, and then finally a frozen Austin Powers, who is frozen in that little cryogenic freezing tube or whatever, and he's like, yeah, obviously stripped butt naked, covering his male genitalia. His male genitalia, and yeah, he obviously is doing that, and yeah, he's obviously frozen very, very cold and all that, and then they do the laser cutting, and then they thaw him in the warm liquid goo, and then he takes like probably an hour piss, and then after he's taken a leak for an hour, he from there he is already, kind of a little bit still unconscious, but he's able to talk again. Mars, 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 Mars. Yeah, and then all of a sudden he officially wakes up and he goes, "Where am I?" And then Basil reminds Austin, "You're in the Ministry of Defense. The year is 1997, and you've been cryogenically frozen for 30 years." And then all of a sudden, Austin like shouts as though he's like completely angry or something, but really it's a part of the unfreezing process. And all of a sudden he says he's having a difficulty controlling the volume of his voice and all that. Yeah, yada yada yada. And then he tells him about, like, he introduced him to the American and the Russian, and then apparently Austin's under the impression that Russia and England were still at war over the Cold War, but he tells him that it's over and all that. And then he's reminded by the American, played by Charles Napier, that they've got a madman on the loose in Nevada, and that it's Dr. Evil, and Austin obviously knew right away that it was him. And then he finds out that he'll be working with not Mrs. Kensington this time, but her daughter, after, because it's obvious that when Austin was frozen, he was obviously 30 years old himself, and now we got Vanessa, who is probably maybe 29 or 28 in this movie, and kind of appearingly, and she comes into play. We don't really think that she's going to be Austin's type yet, because she kind of seems like the more no-nonsense type of gal. Somebody who's more serious and analytical and smart and all that, compared to your typical 60s girl that would want to shag all the time and all that. And Vanessa tells Austin that her job is to get him more familiar and used, and to get his feet wet in the 90s and to help adjust to it and all that, because a lot has changed since the 60s and everything. Because of course in the 90s people took relationships and stuff like that more serious and all that. Things weren't really as groovy in the 90s as they were in the 60s. In fact, they're far less groovy now in 2022, 25 years after 1997. The 25th anniversary of Austin Powers overall. That's another reason why I've decided to review these movies. And then all of a sudden Austin gets his stuff and everything, including a penis enlarger pump. He denies that it's his and everything and all that. And then maybe I'll just not get completely into detail. And then after that, we see Dr. Evil. He too has been thawed. I mean, he gathers around everybody that he hasn't talked to in years or people for the first time, and he like even said that complications arose in the unfreezing process, and Mustafa is the one that like created the machine, and it caused Mr. Bigglesworth to lose all his hair and all that, and Mustafa tried explaining to him and all that, and of course, Dr. Evil, as naive as he is, he tells him to silence and burns him, badly burns him, and, that little funny thing that Mustafa does, like, it's like this happens, he tells him we were unable to anticipate feline complications to the unfreezing process and blah, 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 and all of a sudden he says, I'm still alive down here, but I'm very badly burned and stuff. Yeah, that kind of thing. And, when he did that, yeah, all of a sudden, the guy comes in and, like, apparently, instead of helping him, he just shoots him in the arm, and I guess he either, knocked him out cold, or he just, killed him, because either way he needed to shut him up. And then, of course, we see, he introduces Frau Farbissina, and then Random Task, who's influenced off of a real James Bond villain right here, Odd Job off of Goldfinger. That's actually a pretty good James Bond movie with Sean Connery. And, Odd Job, he actually had that, like, top hat, and he would, like, throw that top hat. Well, anyway, Random Task is a little different at that technique of style of fighting. Instead of throwing his hat, he takes off his shoe and just throws it the same way Odd Job did with his hat in James Bond 007 Goldfinger that came out back in the 60s, and it was, like, one of the best Sean Connery Bond films ever. Because, like I said, Austin Powers is like a more passionate version of James Bond, I would probably have to think, and is a lot more wild and funny and just loves a good shag, let's just put it that way. And, yeah. And then he introduced another villain that's been hired by Dr. Evil to go after Austin Powers, Paddy O'Brien. And he wears a bracelet with the shapes of the Lucky Charms marshmallows. He considers it his Lucky Charms, and then he even says Lucky from those Lucky Charms cereal commercials. They're always after me, Lucky Charms. And Frau Farbissina, actually laughs at it like he was joking, but Paddy O'Brien claims that he wasn't joking, that they really were after his Lucky Charms, and then she makes some references to, like, the television commercials and, like, the marshmallows and the cereals, like when in fact, when I eat Lucky Charms, as an adult, a lot of times I'll eat the cereal part first and then save the marshmallows. Like, yeah, it really is candy that you're having fun and all that. She kind of made her point when she said that. Almost like it kind of seemed like a improvised thing, but I'm not sure if it was in the script originally or if it was improvised. I don't know. They improvise a lot in these movies, though. It's incredible. But anyway, number 2 is introduced, and he's played by Robert Wagner, who was even formerly, long before this movie came out, known for being in that show called Heart to Heart, where he was a man named Jonathan married to a woman named Jennifer, and the two would get into all sorts of adventures. I haven't seen a lot of the series, but I've seen maybe little bits and pieces of it. I hear it's a good show and everything, but I've never really came around to giving it a full analysis myself. But anyway, he informs Dr. Evil that over the last 30 years, that their company has become a very big, major corporation, and that they own cable companies in 38 of 50 U.S. states, and they even own a steel mill in Cleveland, Ohio. They own a ship in the coast of Texas and the Gulf of Mexico, and that they own a oil factory in Seattle, Washington, and then a factory in Chicago, Illinois. Yeah, they got all that out of the way and described it, and yeah, I know they did that. And something else I kind of need to talk about. Of course, Dr. Evil kind of comes up with some plans and he's unaware of certain stuff that's happened over the years. And then he apparently comes up with an idea for that warhead and everything, and that the United Nations and all that have to surrender and all that and give them, money, $100 billion, even though he suggested $1 million. Yeah, but number two tells Dr. Evil that over the past 30 years, $1 million just ain't enough anymore, and tells him $100 billion, and even that ain't quite enough. It's like Dr. Evil's just kind of clueless on how to be a good villain here. That's where the comedy stuff comes into play. And then, of course, you're on Austin's private jumbo jet, where Vanessa is on there with them, and Austin Powers has to sign some release forms that she's been asked Austin to sign and all that, so he can continue being with the, with the Ministry of Defense. And yeah, because Austin's been gone a long time, and apparently a lot of that stuff's expired for him. He obviously has to, sign a lot of these papers for the Ministry of Defense. And I mean, they are release forms. I heard that, but they obviously required Austin's signature on those release forms. And of course, Austin having a promiscuous attitude and all that towards Vanessa and everything, and he just really desperately wants to have sex with her and all that. He has no control over his libido because he's just been thawed and he's not had any in 30 years and all that, some other stuff. And then, of course, all that drama goes down on the jumbo jet of Austin, and then we go back to Dr. Evil, where he discovers from Frau Forbissina that he has a son, and his name is Scott Evil, played by Seth Green, who's still a pretty popular icon today, even ended up voicing Chris Griffin in the show Family Guy, and creator of Robot Chicken and a ton of other funny cartoons out there. Yeah, it's like Seth Green, who would have thought that he'd become such a major, important figure in the world of Hollywood and other stuff in entertainment out there. I mean, I don't think really anybody really saw it coming when they first saw, Seth Green playing Scott Evil in this movie of Austin Powers International Man of Mystery in 1997, which was basically the initial stages of the late 90s. And of course, Seth Green, pretty much has done it all already, and it's already 25 years after that. We just didn't really know what he had ahead of him. And of course, Dr. Evil, reveals to Scott that he's his father, but since Scott's already, 17 years old, he is insecure around Dr. Evil and all that, and he refuses to do evil deeds and all that and be a part of the organization. And he even, Dr. Evil, even does the, after Scott tells him that he hates him, Dr. Evil, he's like, I'm hip, and then he does the Macarena dance. Even in 1997, the Macarena, at least in May of 97 when this movie came out, the Macarena was a widely known dance since it came out a year before this movie. And when Dr. Evil does the Macarena, yada yada yada, and then says, well, don't look at me like I'm friggin' Frankenstein, give your father a hug and stuff. And it's obvious from where Scott's never even met his father once in his whole life, and all of a sudden Scott's this enthusiastic, wanting to, catch up with his son and all that after so long, and he's obviously creeping the hell out of Scott by wanting a hug from him and everything. And then Austin and Vanessa arrive in Las Vegas, and then they get their hotel room, and Vanessa says that Austin has to sleep on the sofa because the idea that she just doesn't really care for Austin. It's like a business only thing. She won't allow him to sleep in the bed with her. She won't allow him to sleep in the bed with her. And, yeah, and then all of a sudden, they start to unpack, and then all of a sudden, apparently, Vanessa labels everything that she has in her bag, and then all of a sudden, Austin catches that and says, "Blimey, nerd alert!" Yeah, and then, even finds, the Swedish and larger pump in his bag again, and then they're at the casino, and all of a sudden, Austin says to that one cowboy, "Hey, there you are," and then he replies, "Hi, do I know you?" "No, but that's where you are, you're there." And then all of a sudden, number two is playing a game of blackjack hosted by the soup Nazi from Seinfeld, or the actor that played the soup Nazi, and, only he doesn't say, "No soup for you," or anything like that. Instead, he's, like, talking in just his normal voice, and not anything like, how he did as the soup Nazi. And, he's hosting blackjack there at the table there, and Austin asks if he can join him and all that, and number two allows him to do so, and apparently number two and Austin both missed their chances, even though the soup Nazi advised them to not take that and all that, but they replied they both love to live dangerously. And then Austin and number two, they introduce each other to one another, and he even, like, introduces Vanessa as his wife Oprah, and he even introduces himself as Richie Cunningham because he doesn't want him to know who he really is yet. And apparently, Austin and a lot of anyway, yeah, she's a very attractive woman in it, and she's the secretary of number two, and yeah, she's like number two's valet and all this, and she's infatuated by Austin, and Austin's infatuated by her too, and obviously, Austin's in that situation where he's obviously has to challenge himself when it comes to bad behavior in the 90s, such as being unfaithful to a romantic partner. And, yeah, and then all of a sudden, number two says he has to go to the bathroom, and then Austin goes in there and then, like, sees that blind man sitting right there on that, like, chair. He's like a bathroom attendant, and he's blind, and then he, like, even asks him, "Did you happen to see anything at all?" And then cowboy, or a guy dressed as a cowboy, played by Tom Arnold, comes in, and all of a sudden he even, like, compliments Austin's outfit. "That is one crazy getup you got there, fellow." And then Austin replies, "Thank you." And then he asks, "Are you in the show?" And then Austin replies, "No, actually, I'm English." And then they both have to take craps. And then Patty O'Brien, obviously hired by Dr. Evil, makes a murder attempt on Austin while he's in the bathroom in the stall going, he's... Yeah, and then all of a sudden, Austin apparently detected it behind him and was able to counteract the murder, the choke. And anyway, he does that, and then all of a sudden he, like, starts, and of course the Tom Arnold's character, his minor character, like, sees the feet moving, and then he, like, tells him, "Hey, don't force it, you're gonna blow out an artery, drop along." And then all of a sudden, Austin, even, like, back headbutts the Patty O'Brien, and puts his head in the toilet, while at the same time defending himself, and he, like, asks, "Who does number two work for?" and stuff, and then, of course, Tom Arnold's character says, "That's right, buddy, you show that turd who's boss," and then says, "That sounds pretty nasty, how about a courtesy flush over there?" And all of a sudden, Austin just flushes Patty O'Brien down the toilet, being able to kill him in self-defense. And then he walks out of the stall, and then Arnold's cowboy character, whose miner goes, "Holy cow, what did you eat?" Yeah, because he sees Patty O'Brien's corpse sticking straight up the toilet since he was flushed down. Yeah, because Austin drowned him in the toilet. And of course, Austin already threatens the United Nations about his warhead and everything, and apparently the United Nations leader from like Iran or something, played by Babu Bhatt from Seinfeld. Actually, noticed like several people who made guest appearances in the TV show Seinfeld make appearances in this original Austin Powers film. Like I said a few minutes ago, the Soup Nazi was hosting the blackjack table when Austin and number two first crossed paths. And Babu Bhatt like says we're not. It's not our job to negotiate with terrorists, and all of a sudden, I mean. And then, of course, the United Nations has to make plans to, how to respond to this and everything, and other stuff. Boy, so much funny. These are funny movies, of course. All right, and I'm trying to think here of something. What happened next after this? Yeah, and then of course, the next morning, Austin and Vanessa like obviously see the limousine, and they catch random task with Mr. Bigglesworth, and Austin Powers, of course, says that's Dr. Evil's cat, and then Vanessa asks him how he can tell, and then he even says, "I never forget a pussy cat." And then Burt Bacharach plays music on the roof of a bus while they're on like a date with a romantic dinner. And of course, you're even here in Las Vegas, you could even see McDonald's in the background, even advertisements for Burger King and Pizza Hut. Boy, see that all over the place here, and even at this part. And apparently, Austin and Vanessa have themselves a time right there in Vegas. And then they're at the hotel, and they play Twister and like drink tons of wine. And then after all that, Vanessa is drunk, and she falls asleep and is like completely hungover and all that. And then Basil contacts Austin, even with Vanessa like falling asleep on Austin's hand. Okay, Austin needs his hand back and stuff. And then this is kind of the part of the movie I don't really like. Just the fact that it's a little bit too shagging. They're in a hot tub and everything. It just kind of seemed a little bit too real there. And then, of course, after this, of course, Prowl created some fembots to kill Austin Powers and all that, and yeah, this has happened, and all this, yeah, and then of course, Basil even creates weapons, to stop Doctor Evil's forces and everything, and they're like disguised. They're like weapons disguised as, you know, toothbrushes and toothpastes and all that. But it turns out they actually were dental equipment, but they were to like actually use them as weapons. And of course, Austin sees Basil's mother and like does it's not your mother, it's a man, and yeah, just to add more comedy to the thing. And of course, Dr. Evil and Scott have a therapy session with the therapist is played by Princess Leia's actress, Carrie Fisher. For a year, it took me years to actually kind of find Carrie Fisher in this movie after I found out she was in it, but apparently she is the therapist who's leading that group and everything, and yeah, and of course, Doctor Evil like tells him his history, tells her and the whole therapy group his life story and everything, and Scott just like was telling about how he finds that Dr. Evil like makes him feel drained and everything, and because he obviously doesn't have a very good relationship with him, and yeah. And then of course, Vanessa has a bit of a disagreement clash with Austin and all that because she's disappointed that he slept with number two's secretary, who's very sexy. And Austin, of course, takes plenty of time to think about this, and then, you know, Vanessa finally kind of comes to her senses and like has more, more of a sense of empathy for how Austin's feeling because he's missed out on so much since the '60s, and how the world changed a lot, even from the '70s, the '80s, and up until the '90s and everything. So, yeah, it's obvious that Vanessa herself is now feeling kind of has a little bit more of an understanding why Austin messed up at this. He just had no idea that that's how it went. And yeah, they go to Verchicon, Dr. Evil's headquarters, and they're disguised as tourists. And then they knock out two of the employee personnels, and they go back into the where and personnel like operates Verchicon, the empire organization of the world, and the guards, attack, and then apparently Austin and Vanessa hijack this steamroller, and when they hijack the steamroller, one of the guards just stands there and just screams. He had plenty of time to move out of the way, according to that last side angle. He could have simply got out of the way, but instead he just stands there and screams no over and over again. He had plenty of time to get out of the way, but he just lets the steamroller kill him, and then Austin and Vanessa try to go further into the lair of Dr. Evil, only to be knocked out by random tasks, as random tasks like butts their heads together, and yeah, and then they're seized by Dr. Evil, and all of a sudden Dr. Evil recontacts the United Nations and everything, and all of a sudden, he tells them that like they're too late and all that, and you had my instructions, bye bye, and then Beavis and Butthead, like a little clip, appears right there. It's actually pretty good to know that New Line Cinema was able to get permission from Paramount to have that little set of Beavis and Butthead footage there. And then all of a sudden, they're in Dr. Evil's throne room or like briefing room, whatever, and then all of a sudden, even Austin and Vanessa are there, and then he even like says to him, "Do you like your quasi-futuristic clothes, Mr. Powers? I designed them myself." And then Scott comes in, and then more bickering between the father and the son come into play, and all of a sudden, Austin and Vanessa are like in the tank with the guard, and all of a sudden, he like reminds them about the sharks with lasers attached to their heads, and apparently he finds out instead of sharks with lasers on their heads, they're sea bass, mutated sea basses that are ill-tempered, and apparently, he asks them to close the tank, and then all of a sudden, when he closes the tank, he closes. Yeah, and then all of a sudden the tank's closed, and then all of a sudden, Scott like reminds him, "Aren't you gonna watch them? They can get away." And then Dr. Evil replies, "No, I'm going to leave them alone and not actually witness them dying. I'm just gonna assume it all went to plan." What? And all of a sudden, and then the shush, which I actually read an article this morning, or like sometime earlier, just recently, that the shush was kind of improvised, according to the source that I looked it up from. I don't know if it's overall confirmed, but they suggesting that like the Dr. Evil doing shush the Scott was like all improvised, and even Seth Green was like relieved because I think he just kind of wasn't really in the mood to like do anything else, and the fact that he didn't really have to say anything, and at responding with like a large amount of words. It actually relieved them. And then Austin and Vanessa are going down into like the sea bass pool where they will most likely get eaten alive. And apparently, Vanessa had the dental floss, and then all of a sudden they use it to swing onto the ledge, and then they kill the guard, and then all of a sudden, the sea bass eats the guy's head off, and then Austin replies with head jokes. Not a good time to lose one's head. And then Vanessa replies, indeed, and then Austin says, that's not a way to get ahead in life. And then it's a shame he wasn't more headstrong. He'll never be the head of a major corporation. And then all of a sudden, Austin, gets another one of those like work kind of like things. And then he sees the emergency exit and then orders Vanessa to get help and everything. So, like that military stuff so that they can stop Dr. Evil. And all of a sudden, Austin gets the thing stuck and everything. And just so funny. Hold on a minute. Okay, I'm back. And I'll go on ahead and finish talking about Austin Powers International Man of Mystery. And they take out the guard, and then like I said, Austin gets that thing stuck, and then Dr. Evil's about to get away and have success with his diabolical plan, and that is to have the nuclear warhead go into the Earth's crust to make all the volcanoes erupt and everything, so he can take over the world. And then, as Austin's about to stop him, apparently the fembots come in and counteract his move. And apparently they try to seduce Austin to stop going after Dr. Evil and everything. And when he does that, apparently these fembots, they do everything they can, and they're charming and everything. And apparently Austin does start to resist them, and then they say he can't resist them, but then he says, ooh, contraire, but I bet you can't resist me. And then the Divinals, I Touch Myself plays in the background, and then Austin strips in his underwear, and then, yeah, it's a little too much, but at the same time, I guess many people would find this funny. And yeah, he even lights a whole bunch of cigarettes and puts a cigarette in each one of the fembots' mouth and everything, uses his mojo and causes two of them to blow into smithereens or at least their heads. And then Vanessa apparently catches Austin, and Austin explains everything, and she believes him. And yeah, and apparently that one guard, the one that was still looking at Austin, and then the other one grabbed him away. Presumably that guard, I think it's an indication that he was gay, since he was obviously staring at Austin in his knickers. And yeah, and then of course Austin's now dressed, and then it plays Secret Agent Man by Johnny Rivers. And then even Dr. Evil says, open the freaking door and stuff. And then he's singing that Meow Mix commercial thing. And then Austin says, I got you now, Dr. Evil, and all that. And then Dr. Evil even says, isn't it ironic that parties and all in the 90s are considered to be evil? And then all of a sudden, Austin suggests that the real evil is criminal masterminds like Dr. Evil himself, and people who are just corrupt politicians and all that. But then he even makes other suggestions freedom didn't fail. Right now we got freedom and responsibility. It's a very groovy time and stuff. And then Dr. Evil even replies, there's nothing more pathetic than an aging hipster and stuff. And Then, of course, Scott comes in, and first, of course, Alada is Miss, yeah, the number two secretary has Vanessa at gunpoint and even says, "Not so fast." And then Dr. Evil replies, "It seems the tables have turned, Mr. Powers." And then Scott comes in, "I can take my Sega, right, Dad?" And then it seems the tables have turned again, Dr. Evil. And then Dr. Evil says, "Not really, kill the little, see if I care." And then Scott says, "Dad, we just had a breakthrough in group. I had the group liquidated, you little shit. They were insolent." And then, yeah, he says he wishes that he had never been born, technically. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Evil says, "Oh, that hurts, Daddy, when you say that honestly," and stuff. And then, number two comes in, and Dr. Evil, even tells number two that his timing was impeccable, but they orders him to kill Austin Powers, but he refuses to. It's like you kind of think that number two is betraying Dr. Evil here, which kind of seems senseless, but when he got very badly burned, I guess that taught him a lesson not to double cross his boss again like that. And, yeah. So, all this, into play and everything, Austin and Dr. Evil, of course, gets away and escapes in his rocket. His whole organization is blowing into smithereens. And then, of course, after they successfully escape, Austin and Vanessa are happily married in their honeymoon suite. And Basil, asks if they received the gifts, and they said they did. And then all of a sudden, Random Task comes in because Austin ordered champagne, and he's under the impression that the room service is there and everything. And this being said, he tells him to come in, and now Austin's in his blue pajama robe, and Vanessa in her yellow one. And then Random Task throws the shoe, and Austin says, "That really hurt. I'm gonna have a lump there, you idiot. Who throws a shoe? Honestly, you fight like a woman, then Yep, then that happens, and then Vanessa hands Austin his Swedish, male anatomy enlarger pump, and then he uses it on Random Tasks, and then Vanessa knocks him out with a glass or something, and then he's knocked out, and then Austin knocks him with an enlarged, and then even the lady down the hall who was going to another part of the hotel screams, "Ah!" freaked out by it. And then all of a sudden, they go to the terrace and look at the stars and all that, and then all of a sudden, Austin gets his telescope and he sees it's Dr. Evil, possibly, because he even says, "Goodness." And then at the end, Dr. Evil, "I'm gonna get you, Austin Powers. It's freaking freezing in here, Mr. Bigglesworth." And then we're ended by some post-credit scenes that aren't really anything to write home about. Just Austin taking a bunch of modeled pictures for his wife, and his band main team perform, BBC. Then the rest of the credits roll, the movie's over. And like I said, this movie, I'm going to go on ahead and rate the movie, since it obviously has a lot of James Bond elements, even compared to the other two movies. It seems like they really, at the same time, while this is a comedy movie, they really tried real hard to make it like a secret agent spy movie, like James Bond. And it wasn't just full of jokes only. It had a little bit of serious elements to it here and there. And the humor was great. I thought, yeah, and there's very little wrong with it. Overall, I'm going to go on ahead and just rate this one probably maybe an 8.5 out of 10. It's definitely a very brilliant, great movie. Alright, now I'm going to be talking about the other Austin Powers movie, The Spy Who Shagged Me, the sequel in this trilogy of these set of three movies that are comedies. And The Spy Who Shagged Me. Now, this one came out in the summer of 1999. I mean, we were all very thrilled and infatuated by Austin Powers, even by this time, and Stars was even playing it a lot on the movie channels. And that's how I actually first knew of Austin Powers. I didn't really know hardly anything about him at all in 1997. Not even a whole lot of James Bond either. Yeah, as a kid, I wasn't allowed to watch everything until I was like a little up in age. But anyway, yeah, and what came to the sequels that everybody liked the first one so much and all that, and how it turned out and everything. People wanted to see more of Mike Myers and company's creation of this hippie agent, from the this this James Bond, who's also got a lot of hippie personality and everything. People just wanted more of it. So in 1999, summer of 1999, which was probably one of the peak year for movies to be released in the theater, thanks to ones like Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, a personal favorite of mine, even my favorite prequel Star Wars movie, but I'll talk about that more in another video, because I'm probably going to be reviewing movies more often now. I mean, I don't upload frequently. I'm not really an active or average YouTuber or YouTube uploader or any of that. I just do a bunch of random stuff as I go and without actually expecting anything from it. But anyway, yeah, what just led to this sequel, and things were very big in the, like I said, it was the peak year for movies. Everybody was just looking for a movie to see, even with others besides just Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I mean, 1999 had a lot of good movies that came out that year, and, like The Matrix, even The Matrix scored a lot of good reactions and got a lot of great reviews at the time, and I still haven't even seen that fourth one yet, but I'm planning on probably giving it a watch, because I get HBO Max, so yeah. And you also had other movies that came out in 1999, such as Wild Wild West, but it doesn't really get a good reputation anymore. And you even had Deep Blue Sea come out that summer, Inspector Gadget, Detroit Rock City. But anyway, I should probably shut up about those and start talking about The Spy Who Shagged Me right now. Okay, in The Spy Who Shagged Me, the movie starts out with They Might Be Giants singing, but it wasn't the two main regular singers of They Might Be Giants performing the lead vocals on this song. It was actually the wife of the man who founded They Might Be Giants. Yeah, as a matter of fact, both of the members of They Might Be Giants had the first name John, and, my name is Jonathan, or I go by John for short, so, yeah, they have my name and everything, and all that. And, yeah, They Might Be Giants, they've had quite a few good songs over the years and stuff, but, for this particular song, the founding member's wife, named Robin, she performed lead vocals on this song, and I've even seen some videos on YouTube where she's performing this song live and does a brilliant job with it. And, even for a heavy-set girl, she's actually not so bad looking either. But anyway, that's a little beside the point. But yeah, we start out, and even the song called Dr. Evil by They Might Be Giants, it sounds typically like your typical James Bond entrance music, kind of like how Goldfinger had a start out song, and View to a Kill by Duran Duran, it's technically one of those. And then Tony J, of course, like we see, it's all like Star Wars and everything, because kind of seems like with the Phantom Menace out, it seemed like there was a lot of Star Wars references out there in the media, and Mike Myers probably was just as excited about it, so he added and threw this in. It's kind of like, Star Wars Flash Gordon, and even the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie had that too, only it was actually more like going completely down instead of like up in like that angle-ish way. Yeah, and then of course you have basically that, and Tony J, of course, is narrating it, which gives it originality compared to Star Wars, and tells them like what happened in the last adventure. I guess maybe if people never actually saw the first International Man of Mystery, that they probably wouldn't really know what was going on, so it kind of gives people suggestions if they wanted to watch the sequel first. And then it cuts, to Dr. Evil, getting out of the big boy and going back to the Earth to cause more havoc and all that, and to try to take over the world again. And then Austin and Vanessa are at their honeymoon suite, and then all of a sudden, Austin even says, "And I'm spent," and then all of a sudden, Vanessa even like makes a joke or something and like asks, "Do you smoke after doing it?" And then Austin replies, "I don't know, baby. I never looked." And then all of a sudden, she like asks what they should do, and then all of a sudden, Austin, even though he's just said he was spent, he says, "How about we shag?" And then says, "We're only up to chapter 11 in the Karma Sutra and all that." And then all of a sudden, Vanessa starts acting very eccentric, very strange. Like she's just all of a sudden so unpredictable, and like repeating, "I'm gonna have some more champagne," blah blah blah, and then all of a sudden Austin like asks her, "Are you okay?" And then she replies that she's never felt better, and then busts the champagne bottle with her grip, and then Austin says, "All right then, I'm just gonna go watch a movie." And then, "Hey, M. Light Flint, that's my favorite movie," and stuff. And all of a sudden, Austin like hits the rewind button on the video or whatever he had in, and then Vanessa's like responding towards it, and all of a sudden, he realizes that the remote is having an effect on Vanessa, and she turns out to be a fembot, and then blows up. The only thing is that I don't think Vanessa was a fembot the whole time in general. More like I think Vanessa no longer wanted to stay with Austin because of how he was, how promiscuous he was. And she probably made a deal with Dr. Evil to kill him off. And Dr. Evil sent that fembot clone of Vanessa to do all this. This is like kind of a conspiracy theory I have, even though I don't really do those movie conspiracy theories anymore. Even though I only did 2 of them based on one franchise, but I just don't want to really ruin too much of this. Anyway, I'm back. And then, of course, the fembot well, actually, here's what goes on, and then you hear Dr. Evil's recorded message. "Here's your wedding present, Mr. Powers. A kamikaze bride from me, Dr. Evil." And then, of course, Austin starts to mourn, and but then also realizes that he's single again and that he can act like how he did in the 60s and everything. And he's prancing around in the hotel where he was having his honeymoon with Vanessa, butt naked, and then props are like covering his genitalias and all that. And yeah, he gets all that out of the way. The opening credits are over. Now you see Dr. Evil and Scott doing kind of what they did with Princess Leia in the first film, only this time they are on national television on Jerry Springer. And then, Dr. Evil even comes in, and all of a sudden, he's like, "Because you're not," Scott even like asks him why he ran out, and then he's like, "Because you're not quite evil enough." "Well, it's true. You're quasi-evil. You're the margarine of evil. You're the Diet Coke of evil. Just 1 calorie, not evil enough," and stuff. And then that one guy accuses him of being a freak, and then Scott, of course, stands up for himself and kind of his father here. And, yeah. And then, of course, they get into it right there in the middle of Jerry Springer, and then Austin takes pictures of a couple of fashion models, and one half of the fashion models works for Dr. Evil. The other half happens to be Rebecca Romaine before she got Stamos. and before she played Mystique in the live-action X-Men movies. And Austin takes pictures of the girls, and then Dr. Evil's at his new lair in Seattle, Washington, which is none other than a Starbucks tower. And and then number two, his psychotic colleague, tells him that they bought out the company a few years ago and stuff, and tells him that the premium coffee and the cool prices for them and all that. He even like says delish and everything, and then all of a sudden, he like gets, number two is so enthusiastic about the Starbucks and all that, and then Dr. Evil replies, "Number two, I make the decisions here, okay? I demand a little respect and all that." And yeah, all of a sudden, Dr. Evil, acting all arrogant towards his minions and everything, and his right-hand men and all that, and like he always does, and even Scott bickers with him on all that, but then number two tells Dr. Evil that he has cloned him, and then Frau Farbissina says here that, yells, "Send in the clone," and then apparently we see his silhouette, but then the door opens and he turns out only being 1/8 of Dr. Evil and everyone else's size. And then that's when Dr. Evil says, "Breathtaking, I shall call him Mini-Me," and yeah, and then all of a sudden, Mr. Bigglesworth and Mini Mr. Bigglesworth for Mini-Me come along and all that, and Dr. Evil makes plans and everything, argues with Scott here, and then his plan is revealed to stop Austin Powers because he realized it's his mojo that's always defeating him. So he realized that when Austin Powers was cryogenically frozen in 1967, he decides to go 2 years after Austin Powers was cryogenically frozen so he could steal his mojo and possibly come back to the future to stop Austin once and for all from always spoiling his plans and everything. And then Dr. Evil and Mini-Me go into the time machine, even though they kind of got to a bumpy start before they officially pulled it off. And then all of a sudden, Dr. Evil even says to Mini-Me, "Don't be scared, Mini-Me." Yeah, because they're about to time travel. And when they time traveled, they run into young number two, now played by Rob Lowe, who has worked with Mike Myers in the first Wayne's World and has done a lot of other material, with Lorne Michaels and Saturday Night Live projects with them. And yeah, and then Rob Lowe, even says that he received the memo from the future and that his volcano lair is up and running and all that. And of course, Austin's still in 1999, 30 years, 30 years in the future compared to what, Dr. Evil's had in 1969 in the past. And him and Dr. Evil's henchman, or henchwoman, Dr. Evil's henchwoman, Ivana Humperlump. Yeah, it's like they're playing chess, but really, they really are just playing a game. They ain't serious about the chess at all, and neither was she. And all of a sudden, even Austin says, "Grr, baby, very grr." And yeah, and then of course, a new character here in the franchise is introduced. We already got introduced to Mini-Me. Now we get introduced to Fat Bastard here. And he's posing as a spy in the Ministry of Defense. He's a rogue. Yeah, he's a rogue spy for them, and he knocks them all out with gas from his bagpipes and steals Austin Powers' mojo from his frozen body. And apparently, Austin felt it in the future, and then he apparently gets like a little car that time travels him to the '60s. That was made by the Ministry of Defense and all that, and he's back in he's like in his shag pad, kind of like in that first movie, and people are like tickled to death to see that Austin isn't frozen, that he's right there inside of him. Even that one lady like faints the moment he's in there, and he runs into a woman that seems to be infatuated by him, known as the name of Robin Swallows, and that she had a maiden name named Spitz, and all that. Yeah, yeah, Robin Swallows Spitz, or Robin Spitz Swallows, and you know, Felicity Shagwell, the new introduced love interest of Austin in this movie, and the overall pretty much third Austin Powers girl, if you include Mrs. Kensington and Vanessa in the original. You can obviously see that she's up on the balcony of the pad, and then all of a sudden, she's like flirting with Austin. All of a sudden, with her rump and everything, and Austin even like says, "Those are skin tights. How do you get into those pants, baby?" and stuff. And then, of course, Robin's still trying to distract them because she works for Dr. Evil and wants to kill him. And apparently, after Felicity Shagwell, Heather Graham, tells Austin this, not to mention how Heather Graham and Mimi Rogers, two Austin Powers girls, were in the Lost in Space remake, and they're all this being made by New Line Cinema. I'm a little off topic, but anyway, I just thought I'd say that out loud. All of a sudden, Austin detects, the Dr. Evil henchman in Robin's eye, the reflection, and then he moves out of the way, and as the man was about to throw a knife in his back, he avoids it, and then she orders him to use the machine gun, and then the bazooka, and then they both jump out of the shag pad, and she even like says that the fall would kill them both, but they both survived it, and Felicity saves Austin's neck. Yeah, and then Austin like jumps into the Jaguar, and the Jaguar that has swinger license plate. Yeah, and then he's like telling Felicity, go, 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 and stuff. And then of course Felicity, introduces herself to Austin and all that, and then all of a sudden they're in the London countryside, and when they're in the London countryside, they run into Mustafa from the original film, played by Will Ferrell. Only he doesn't look old. He looks like how he did at the beginning of the original film, since they're back in the 60s, and all of a sudden, they Felicity like shoots in Mustafa's tires, causing him to lose balance of his car, and then he crashes, and then he gets up, and then all of a sudden Austin says, "Steady now, steady, hands up," and then all of a sudden, Mustafa even asks, "Do you remember me? Austin Powers." And then he says, "I don't recall your name, but your fez is familiar." Yeah, because he was wearing, apparently that thing, that headwear he was wearing, that's called a fez. They wear that like in places like Egypt and Morocco and all that. And anyway, he even says his name is Mustafa and that he's the man that will be killing him. And all of a sudden, Austin's able to overcome him and everything. And then Felicity has him ready for interrogation. And then he reveals to Austin, after he asks who sent him like 3 times, and then all of a sudden, who sent you, and then all of a sudden, he tells him Dr. Evil, and then says that he doesn't like being asked the same question 3 times in a row because it irks him. And then Austin asks, "Where's Dr. Evil hiding?" and then that 3 times, and then he tells him the volcano over there, and then all of a sudden, he asks where the volcano there is, and he says, "I spit at that question," and then he asks, "Do I really have to ask you 2 more times here?" And then all of a sudden, he explains that he didn't really ask the same question 3 times because he asked, "I really have to ask you 2 more times?" and all that. So apparently, Austin and Felicity weren't able to pinpoint Dr. Evil's volcano lair, you know, actual whereabouts. And then all of a sudden, but seeing is the fact that Mustafa ratted him out, Mini Me spits like a pin on him and all that, and then he falls off the cliff, and apparently, he like, hello up there, I've seemed to have fallen down a cliff, and it's like that whole funny thing he gets into. I've been, according to the timer on this camera, I've been going on talking about these movies so far for the last hour and 10 minutes, 15 seconds. Starting to kind of run out of words here. Just thought I'd do a double feature. I just watched these movies a little while ago and wanted to review them. Boy. And then, of course, Fat Bastard comes into play with the Mojo, and then Dr. Evil even says he wants to eat Mini-Me and all that. And then Dr. Evil, of course, gets the Mojo from Fat Bastard, and all of a sudden he ends up with a little bit of the Mojo that Austin had, and he apparently has his libido active and looks at Frau, and yeah, they even wanted to promise each other that it wouldn't interfere with the work and all that, and that things wouldn't get weird. Yeah. And of course, Austin and Felicity are still infatuated by each other here, and Austin takes pictures of his frozen body, and then Austin and Felicity go on a date in groovy 1969 London while the Monkees' "I Am a Believer" plays in the background. And funny enough, this movie also, the song by the Monkees, "I'm a Believer." Yeah, funny enough, this same song appeared in the Shrek movie too, which Austin Powers would, of course, go off to voice the iconic Shrek. And "I'm a Believer" was a movie. It was a song that played in the background of it, even at the very end of the movie. But Smash Mouth covered the song, and it even played at the end of Shrek Forever After, and it was covered by Weezer then. As a little off topic, but anyway, yeah, and then they dance to Elvis Costello and Burt Bacharach, and it's kind of funny that they're slow dancing to a movie slow dancing to a song, man, my words ain't coming out right, but that they're slow dancing to a song that's against love. Yeah. It's like, yeah, he's kind of like being pessimistic in his song about love, and yet Austin and Felicity are slow dancing to it. It's like, you think they probably wouldn't have been slow dancing to this song here. But, yeah. And then, of course, other stuff gets in the way, and then he finds out that it was Fat Bastard that stole his mojo, and then apparently Austin kind of pushes Felicity away because he's sad because he doesn't have his mojo now. He doesn't think he's capable of anything, and apparently Basil hires Felicity to put a tracking beacon on Fat B so that he could and then they like shag and everything, and she puts the beacon on him. Not to mention how Fat Bastard even drinks out of a baby bottle too. And yeah, that happens, and of course Dr. Evil makes more plans to take over the world. He even talks about his Death Star, so to speak. And yeah, even Scott like time traveled and ended up in 1969 himself. And yeah, and all this goes down, and of course Dr. Evil even threatens the president at the time, played by Tim Robbins. He even like makes references to the 90s, like "You complete me" and all that. And then, of course, Even Austin and Felicity meet back up. They reconcile, and they find out that fat bastard was at the Paddington station, and he was in the bathroom, the private bathroom of it, and they had to take the stool sample back, and then Austin ends up drinking the stuff, thinking he was pouring in coffee. He even actually took a sip out of it and drank it, and actually enjoyed it. He even had a fat bastard poop mustache right on him. It's like, boy. But yeah, and then other stuff, Austin and Felicity end up going to Doctor Evil's island, and then they're out of the submarine, and yeah, they're both wearing bikinis and everything. Austin wearing one that was probably another piece of comedy material, and that was another thing that kind of went over the top. I think why I kind of prefer this one less compared to most others. Most people kind of prefer this one over the first or Goldmember, but it's actually my least favorite, and partially because of some of the humor just going too over the top. Like, they tried too hard to make this one funny, I think, compared to the others at times, because it was like a big blockbuster hit for the summer of '99 movies. And all of a sudden, Dr. Evil and Mini-Me are playing on pianos similar to The Island of Dr. Moreau, where Marlon Brando's version of Dr. Moreau and his little midget companion are both playing the piano and all that. That was obviously what inspired this scene. That inspired it. It was the inspiration for it. Yeah, I'm just a little tired right now. It's already after, like 1 o'clock in the morning here where I'm at. On 15th of May. It's early Sunday morning. I should be in bed right now, but anyway, yeah, yet they're performing a song that came out in the '90s. One of Us. What if God was one of us? That Joan Osborne. That was actually a pretty popular hit back in the mid '90s. I still like that song to this day, and even Jim Carrey even sang that song at that one part on Bruce Almighty after he first is rewarded with God's powers in the movie, but that's a little off topic, so we're not talking about that movie, but yeah. And then, of course, Dr. Evil raps his own version of Just the Two of Us that Will Smith made. And then the first ever Cast of Shadow sequence is filmed right here in the tent, and the guards are like seeing it, and due to the misunderstanding, seeing the fact that the silhouettes kind of leave a false impression of what's going on. It's like they think that Felicity's like removing all that stuff out of Austin's rear end, but that ain't it. But yeah, and then all of a sudden, after one thing leads to another, and they're captured by the F guards, and Austin learns that Felicity cheated on him, and has a similar reaction to what Vanessa did when she discovered that Austin did it to her with number two's old secretary, and yeah, and then of course Dr. Evil and Mini-Me make preparations to go to the moon. And then Austin and Felicity are captured by the F Guard and are placed in that room with the lava of the volcano lair. And Austin's still pretty disappointed at Felicity, even though it's no time to get jealous, as she told him. And but then she apologizes and everything, and they reconcile. Austin believes her and forgives her, and then they make plans to escape, and apparently Dr. Evil and Mini-Me already launched to the moon here at the moon base. And yeah. And then of course Austin and Felicity meet up at the moon base. Yeah, they meet up with the bad forces of Dr. Evil at the moon base, and Mini-Me apparently attacks Austin and everything. Yeah, and when that happened, I mean, Mini Me beats the living crap out of Austin and everything, and pretends to like surrender, and he like does peace, and then apparently then he gives him like the middle finger, and then does more beating to him. Even gets up in his suit, and then Austin has to go into the lunar disposal and eject Mini Me from his suit, and then Mini Me is already being sucked into space, but Mini Me, being a clone and not really a human, gives him the ability to survive in space, obviously. And then Austin apparently goes into the, lair, because apparently Felicity was being held captive by Dr. Evil, and then Dr. Evil says, well, it looks like you have a choice, Mr. Powers, to either save the world and stop me, or save your girlfriend. Yeah, and then, of course, Austin does save the world, and he tries to save Felicity too, but it was just a very, one of those, like, bad plots, because he could only choose one over the other, and apparently, Felicity dies, and then of course, Dr. Evil reminds him of the time portal in that chamber, that he could go back and save her. And then he does that, and then apparently past Austin comes into play, and then all of a sudden you save the, like, that question, giving him the choice, and then the present Austin comes in and says, I choose love, baby, and all that. And yeah, and then all of a sudden, the fire, the laser, and all that, like, restarts over again, and this time Austin saves Felicity, and all of a sudden, and then the past Austin even asks about the policy of like the threesome and everything. And then apparently Dr. Evil throws the mojo up into the air, and it goes down, and then the whole moon base is self-destructing and everything. And yeah, and that's where Austin apparently Austin and Felicity, and even the past Austin, they all go back into 1999, and apparently, like, even like earlier in the movie, even when Austin, or even like, like in this movie, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, when Dr. Evil and Mini Me were first going to the moon, there were like all these references about it, like resembling the male genitalia, and then you see more of that, later in the movie, but before this happens, hold on a minute. Okay, back where I left off. Yeah, and then Austin and Felicity are back in 1999, presumably to live happily ever after, very, very much like the last film. And Fat Bastard comes in. Austin's his where he took the pictures and all that, like his studio, and comes right through the door, makes like one of those big like holes in the door, and all of a sudden he pulls out like this gun, and he like even asks, do you fancy another go, because once you've had fat you never go back. And then all of a sudden Felicity like even asks if he's happy, and then he even like gives like a big lecture and everything, and says, I can't stop eating. I eat because I'm unhappy, and I'm unhappy because I eat. And then it's one vicious cycle. Now, if you excuse me, there's someone I have to get in touch with and forgive myself. And then he lets one rip. And then after he lets one rip, he even says, sorry, I farted. It's a long road ahead. And then all of a sudden, he says, oh, who am I kidding? I'm going to kill you both anyway. And then Felicity Shagwell like kicks him right in the crotch, in the groin, and then he says, oh, right in the mommy daddy button, and then he falls flat down face first and is knocked unconscious. He even like, he's so, his weight like even causes a lot of stuff to knock over and everything. And then Felicity like turns on, well, of course, Austin rebukes Felicity for what she did to Fat Bastard. But then he even like says he brought the best part of the 60s back with him. And and then Felicity goes over and hits a button, and then a party goes with a Bangles song playing called Get the Girl. Yeah, the fact that they used Bangles songs and stuff from Susanna Hoffs in this isn't surprising, seeing as the fact that the director of these movies, Jay Roach, is married to Susanna Hoffs. Pretty interesting, so it's not surprising that he would get her to collaborate for these movies, and as well as Mike Myers going along with it. And then, of course, like I said, you hear more of these like jokes about the male genitalia, and then he obviously ends up giving Mini Me a little shot. It's a flu shot. You've been in the coldness of space, and I don't want you to get sick. It's one thing to attack me, it's another to attack my Mini Me. I'm going to get you, Austin Powers. And Austin and Mini Me do their evil laughter, and then the movie is closed, or is it? There's a post-credit scene with another Jerry Springer. Frau Farbissina admits that Scott wasn't invented by a test tube like in the original film, that yeah, that Dr. Evil and Frau actually did have them. And then, of course, you have Austin coming home to Felicity after going somewhere for an errand or whatever, and he even hears Felicity like going, you know, she's shagging somebody, and Austin opens the door, and he's under the impression that Felicity cheated on him again, but then it turns out to be past Austin, who says technically it's not cheating and all that. And then all of a sudden, you know, they decide to do the threesome, and then the credits roll, and then Mustafa is apparently still lying on the countryside of England, and even breaks forth the wall. Maybe somebody who can call an ambulance, and somebody in the lobby can call an ambulance, since he even asked, is the movie over and everything. Funny. And then the New Line Cinema, and then the movie's over. And since I rated the other one, see, like I said, you know, International Man of Mystery was definitely a very good spy comedy film and everything, and it did everything it could to also kind of make it action-packed and entertaining. But this Spy Who Shagged Me had a little bit of little over-the-top humor when it came to a lot of the sex humor, the gross stuff and everything, even Austin Powers drinking Fat Bastard's poop and saying it's nutty, and Austin Powers wearing that bikini when they ended up on the island, just all that. I don't think that this one is therefore quite as good as the original. But yeah, the predecessor of Austin Powers with the sequel, I would have to give this one, I'd probably go on ahead and probably rate this one maybe a 7.1 out of 10. It's still a very enjoyable movie and everything, and it has a lot of great moments. And even Heather Graham was a very attractive woman at the time, and Felicity Shagwell, I mean, she's definitely babelicious. I mean, it's a good thing that Austin ended up with a blonde in this one over brunette and everything, and yeah, so, but like I said, I think they kind of like tried a little too hard to make it funny. But yeah, that's my conclusion for the first two Austin Powers movies. Anyway, I am signing off.